Welcome to Grab Lives, everyone. I'm your host, John Vargas. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate your support. And this is going to be the first episode of 2026, the new year. Just to start off with our disclaimer, everything we say and do on this podcast platform has nothing to do with the views or the opinions of the City of Los Angeles Fire Department. I'm going to start off this new year really focusing on solutions, putting things into context, and putting a big emphasis on how we can take everything that people talk about from professional inputs and firefighter stories about PTSD, PTSI. How can we fix it? That's what I am focused on. I'm tired of the same old stories, the same old diagnoses, the same old symptoms, okay? Now's the time to put everything into application, into action. So if you keep listening throughout this year, that's what I'm focused on. I'm focused on removing chronic pain from someone's algorithm of struggling with mental illness or mental issues or nightmares, anxiety, depression. I'm looking forward to going deeper into human consciousness, how we perceive reality, how we perceive trauma, how we perceive emotional wounding. So stay tuned this year, and I have a lot of guests that are lined up for helping this cause, for helping this movement, for finding solutions. So thank you everyone for your support. When you guys like and subscribe the podcast platform, it really helps me do the best I can to reach people and to also get other people who want to help. And that's what I've seen over a period of time, that people have reached out to me, like watching the work that I'm doing, and there becomes a legion of human beings that are talented to figure out what's going on. And that's what I'm built on doing. Today's podcast episode is going to be with Dr. Kristy De Leon. She's a sex and couples therapist. So we're opening up the veil behind taboo talk around sex. And, I'm very open about talking about, my relationship with sex and as a man, how that looks. And, I had a lot of toxic behavior around sex for a very long time. So, I think over time, it's becomes a relationship. It's what I've seen it is that it's an appetite that you learn to respect. And I think it's a really fascinating episode. Dr. Kristy is a really talented person, and her perspective, she's also a firewife where she's been dedicated to her husband, where he was trying to become a firefighter. And I know how that road looks. It's really difficult to stand next to someone while they're working for pennies and trying to build up their resume to get hired by a really good department. So, and even going through the fire academy, that support is huge. So, much love and respect to Dr. Kristy, her words, her wisdom. So I'm thinking it's going to be a regular thing with Dr. Kristy to have her on regularly to talk about sex, because it's a really tough thing when you're in a marriage or you're in a relationship, and being open about how we can get past these really silly things we put in our minds about our relationship with sex. So thank you everyone for listening, and keep supporting Grab Lives. It's really helping me when people text me and send me messages on Instagram about how much this podcast has helped them. That really helps, because sometimes I get down in the dumps about having this podcast platform sometimes, because I work, full time, and I got to do other stuff around home. And, this is secondary to all those things. So thank you everyone for listening once again. And I love you. Take care.
It's time for Grab Lives.
All right. Dr. Kristy De Leon,
Hi.
nice to have you on the podcast. You're the founder of Ignited Community. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So I really admire firewives, and they have such a hard role in mitigating the lifestyle of a firefighter, and just to create somewhat of a narrative on their part, because
Mm,
we come home and we try to just be normal. And then our lives revolve around our job because we spend one third of our life at the firehouse. So,
yeah.
from spending time during holidays at the firehouse and spending weekends, it can be really tough, especially when you have kids. And
Mm,
that's a part that I really wanted to integrate this year, is understanding that other side of the viewpoint from the women at home who are holding down the fort
yeah.
and being able to sustain some type of life without the man who's providing for their home, and so
Right.
forth, vice versa. But there's more to it than that. There's connection that has to be established between a relationship. There's continuity, transparency,
Hmm.
and for what you do, and provide or kind of establishing an idea of what sex life is like with
Yeah.
couples. So I would really like for you to just kind of introduce yourself, if you don't mind, talk about your work, and also ignited community.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to share more about the topic of sex and intimacy in our community because, like you mentioned, there's so many unique challenges and aspects of this fire family life that I feel that once there's a greater awareness of how to overcome them or to navigate them, that hopefully, I guess my bigger hope is that through all this work, it starts to make a dent on moving the pendulum away from such a high divorce rate and maybe to start to lay the groundwork for the challenges that the career presents to not be as negatively impacting on marriages because
Mm.
there is a way to overcome those things. So, my name is Dr. Kristy De Leon. A couple things in my background that I feel are relevant to my story. I'm first generation Colombian American, originally from New York. And my husband and I met up at UC Davis when we were finishing up our undergraduate. So I've had the honor to really be along for the entire ride from the initial fire academy to buffing up the resume of a million jobs, most of which free, working for free or working for pennies. The whole challenges of applying to various departments, the background checks, the testing. And along that route, it really helped to give me or start giving me an idea of the independence that I would really need to strengthen and foster to be able to be a good partner to him. And that was interesting because my narrative from my upbringing, marriage life, being a spouse, being a partner looked much different. And now looking back, I'm so glad that I was able to be a part of that time with him because it was already having to shift to be able to adopt to this new relationship that we were in. And so, fast forwarding a little bit now, we are towards the end of his career, which is crazy to think, and getting ourselves ready for retirement, making it to retirement, because I know that's a big thing, right? Of the injuries that start popping up from being a part of this career for so long. We have two teenage boys, 14 and 15. Um, Through our marriage, I finished my doctorate, well, went through my whole schooling together, master's and doctorate, and I specialize in sex and couples therapy with first responders and do a lot of work um, around betrayals that happen in
Mm.
relationships. So, unfortunately, you know, infidelity, addiction, um, and the disconnection that was present in the relationship beforehand that unfortunately led to some of those behaviors or heightened those behaviors. And so my work with couples is centered around helping the couple see what are the relationship patterns and dynamics that unfortunately enable unhealthy behaviors. That it's not just only the acting out that we see, perhaps, or that is most evident of the infidelity or addiction or isolation or withdrawal, but there's other pieces within the relationship that are contributing to those behaviors. So that's a lot of my work. And I feel an exciting part of the work to be able to sh- allow couples to see that. So then we're able to have something concrete to address and really start reverse engineering. Well, how is then a healthier version of your marriage, of your relationship going to look like? What needs to be different? What are maybe some of even those little nuances that really have a big impact on the relationship?
All right. Well, thank you for all that, and I really appreciate you. I love how we can kind of break down some of this work because, in the end, like I've done a lot of outreach and trying to help other first responders for quite some time, and it really comes down to the ability to change.
Yeah,
And change only happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. And so,
absolutely.
and even then, people will get down to injury, disease, and loss, and they still will be stubborn and just like hold on to these
Hmm.
old identities and these old patterns of behavior because they don't want to let go of the past or they don't want to let
Hmm.
go of some deep hurt that they've been protecting themselves from. And I
Hmm.
think like over time, we have to mitigate. Okay, well, what can we do to help people to get to the point of choice rather than getting that's preemptive
Hmm.
to not have to deal with injury, disease, and loss. So, unfortunately, with this community, I work in a very busy department with LA City, and it's these guys are super stubborn. They don't want to change. And they think it's a joke when I will bring some of this stuff up, even sex and
Hmm.
being really honoring your partner and respecting them. And it becomes this thing where it's like a game they want to play to just not face the truth. And I think that's one of the hardest parts, that something that we cannot teach.
Hmm.
It's gonna come from your own volition of dealing with your own bullshit, which people just fail to face. And
Yeah.
so I do want to start by talking about, like, I do couples. I would say we don't do therapy, but we do pattern coaching. We have a coach who
Mhm.
teaches us about life and how we can just understand ourselves and what's showing up in our lives and what is some ways to kind of lay a foundation down in our home. And I would
Mm.
say it's one of the most humbling experiences
Yeah.
because I see all of my resistance that comes up during those moments when I'm talking together with
Hmm.
our coach on how, what I'm doing on what's my part on in this story, what's my role in playing this game
Yeah.
of the stuff I want to avoid and hide from because of the way I protect myself, the way I
Mm.
don't want to let go of certain behaviors. And so, what we have done is establishing values first between the
Mm.
two of us. And
Yeah.
we have to speak our values out loud in order for us to see, okay, what's most important to us individually. And then we
Mm.
bring it together. And so that's been a really good start with how we had seen each other, right? It's all about seeing each other. And so an example would be Haley's value is honesty. And
Mm.
honesty's kind of like a very vague term. So we had to break what that was, break it down and see, okay, well, what is honesty to you and what's honesty to me? And for
Right.
her, it was one of the things was, you know, withholding information is an act of violence to her. And
Wow.
so for us talking about it,
Yeah.
like it was just a very dynamic situation where we had to see like, okay, well, what am I withholding from her and not telling her the full truth? And in the end, we both had come to the agreement like we heal through truth and love. If we're going to
Mm.
heal this relationship, that's how we're going to go about it. So I'd love for you to kind of break down, just couples therapy for a second. I don't want to go too far into it because I'm sure that can be a lot. But
Yeah.
things that can be helpful for people to put into context.
Okay, like defining what couples therapy could look like or what it is?
Sure. I mean, just giving real examples. I mean, you can talk about
Okay.
yourself.
Yeah.
That's a great start.
Okay, great. So, something that, I even had to work through for myself when I was pursuing this profession and, did my own therapy work, which I mean, I feel like any therapist or coach, like you kind of have to go through the evolution process yourself and sit on the
Mm,
couch and feel the discomfort and do the growth, feel to really be of use to people. Because if you have no context of what that change process is, I feel like it really does a disservice to the whole process and the client itself. So I think it's huge, John, that you've taken it upon yourself for a variety of different reasons. You got to that place of, I don't want to fucking do this anymore. It
mm,
hurts so bad. I'll do whatever it takes to change. You got to that place. And I was in that place too of realizing that the emotional baggage that I was coming in from my family of origin, from my lived experiences, was just getting heavy and was getting in the way of how I was able to connect with my partner at that time. I forget, we weren't engaged yet. We were still dating, but, or we were in a relationship. And so understanding that when you go to therapy, especially in couples, because I ended up dragging him in because we were having such conflict
mm,
that the role of the therapist, and I think this is a red flag for those of you who maybe who've gone in, and I'm not sure if you've ever experienced it, but a therapist isn't there to judge. We're not judge and jury, at least in how I practice. And I think that's important to state that each therapist comes from a different theoretical lens, has a different idea of what change looks like, what progress looks like, what even the therapeutic relationship with a client looks like. And so my approach is I'm not here to judge who's doing what's right or wrong, but looking like how you mentioned, like those patterns and helping to figure out what's happening and then why is it happening? Is it happening because your partner is doing certain things that are triggering old wounds for you, maybe an old blueprint of what you saw from your parents' dynamics, what you were exposed from your, home life growing up that really created this unhealthy idea of what it is um, to be in relationship, what a committed relationship looks like. How do you treat a partner? What is sex and intimacy? What's the value of that in a relationship? And so I really had to come to terms with the rigid idea that I had from from religion, from culture, was not going to work
mm,
between my boyfriend and I at that time. And I had to start to make adjustments that as much as I wanted him to show up and to be soft and vulnerable and tender, that's not who he is.
mhm,
And I have to stop expecting him to do that because then I'm just setting us both up into this unspoken contract that is not viable. And that's where a lot of um, early conflict came from. And actually, last night I found myself there with him again of having these unrealistic expectations because I wasn't able to clearly voice my need. And I was expecting him to pick up on the subtext of what I was sharing, which is unfair
mm.
because especially so he was on shift last night and I think this might relate, and I'm not sure if you and congratulations, right? You just recently got married. So you
Yeah.
and your new wife, if you've experienced this yet, of he's coming home, it shitty shift. And I'm like, yeah, I had a shitty shift too. Because for whatever reason, I felt like I had to say, hey, just because I'm at home doesn't mean I'm living the life here. We
Mhm.
have teenage boys, stuff happens, and it wasn't so great. And so I need to take care of myself on Friday because he felt that I needed to know how shitty his shift was, that I needed to change my plans to be able to be at home to help him. And I didn't want to do that. And I was starting to get pissed that I wasn't getting the empathy and validation from my statement or just the awareness of, hey, how was your couple days? Did it also suck for you? How can I support you? Like, that's not on his radar to say that. And I have to stop holding him to this unrealistic expectation that it's going to come out that way, at least for in our relationship, and show up in a way for him that I know that he'll be able to see me and to really hear my needs.
Yeah, that sounds very similar to our lifestyle. I think a lot of it has a lot to do with laying down your sword on
Yes,
both parties. And I think
absolutely.
I can come home super aggravated, and
Mhm.
it's a skill set to recognize that I'm in an aggravated bubble. So
Yeah.
for me to get out of that, I have certain practices that
Mm.
I make sure that can relieve that tension so I don't pop.
Yeah.
So, I think for everyone, starting off with personal practices that you can use to lower down stress levels and
Mhm.
to give you an avenue to release some of those emotions that are kind of just on the surface, because surface level stuff is it's just surface level.
Yeah.
That, and we have to just recognize that those are not really who we are. They can become projections, or they become these ways we cope with what's
Mhm.
happening based off
Yeah.
our career or whatever, right? And honesty is just the best thing you can start with as well, because using honesty gives us uh, an opportunity for growth with each other, and ultimately ourselves. And
Mhm.
I think it's just so funny how you're saying that, and it happens all the time with us when I'm coming home and I have an expectation for her, and she's got an expectation from me, and
Yeah.
so we have this thing where I make sure I tell her if I have a really shitty shift, so she's aware of
Yeah.
it at least.
Yeah.
And so just having that common line of communication. And I think in the end, like, expectations are the root of all heartache.
Oh
And so
god,
we
yeah.
create these like fixed expectations on each other. Now we're pawning off a responsibility that is not
Mm.
theirs,
Mhm.
because they're not meeting a standard that you had created that's not real. And
Right.
so I can give an example for that is Haley expects me to be this Prince Charming, and
Mm.
using different romances that she watches on like a Hallmark movie. And so, but I'm not that. And so when she doesn't see that come from me, she gets disheartened. And she like
Mm.
one time we were watching a show together, and she started like getting all irritated with me. I was like, "Hey, what's wrong?" And she saw this guy that was just so like handsome and so
Mm.
romantic, and she realized I'm not that, and that upset her. And so it became this thing where she had to come to grips with I'm not this version that she had created in her mind.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we have to take ownership for what we create in our minds that don't match up with what's real in this plane of existence. So
Yes.
that's one of the hardest things.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to that, think in like our generation specifically, that we've had the luxury to be able to be a part of a mental health movement, and that there are more of these conversations about emotional intelligence, awareness, starting to look at mental and emotional patterns, whereas previous generations did not. We also have the influence of technology and over exposure to information, if you
Mhm.
will. And that really starts impacting that blueprint that we have for ourselves and relationships. So, swinging it back to intimacy and sex, that unfortunately, I work with couples who have one partner, if not both, unfortunately started watching pornography at a very young age.
Mm.
and how that really affects, right? Romance, what you're expecting of your partner to do, how quickly to orgasm, how it should go, how people should be and act, right? And that is all, I mean, sex in of itself can be a very vulnerable topic for a relationship. But when someone comes in with certain ideas, and whether if they've been exposed to porn or not, right, there's going to be ideas around how sex should be and look like, and then how it should be right afterwards, right? What happens afterwards. And so having that awareness to start connecting those patterns for yourself, that it's not just that they don't love me because they're not doing it in this way or being this way with me, but where is this expectation even coming from?
Mm.
Why am I thinking that it needs to play out in this manner and they should be this way with me?
100%. And so I see where we're going now. We're going
Yeah.
straight to sex because I
Yeah.
like, so with sex, I think it's so taboo. It's so
Mm.
taboo in America in general. And I've traveled all over the world in different countries, and it seems to be for some reason, specifically United States, there's a weird nuanced affiliation with shame and just a weird viewpoint on sex in general. Like when you go to Europe, it's different, way
Oh,
different.
yeah.
And other
Mhm.
countries, they just don't treat it the same. And for us,
Mhm.
we've culturally bastardized sex and also capitalized on it. So I
Sure.
just want people to understand culturally, we are within another bubble
Yeah.
of a collective viewpoint on what sex is. The other part is, I'm glad you brought up pornography because
Mm.
it is a problem. And number one,
Yeah.
it's a biological problem with our brain,
Mm.
specifically like
Oh, yeah.
dopamine response. So just the whole pornography thing, our brains are just they're a message, and it's a message and receiving center.
Yep.
So what we see through a lens, our brain doesn't know the difference between what is reality and what's not. It just knows I see this, this is a response, I'm having a physical reaction to this, and so
Mhm.
forth.
Yeah.
So when you're watching pornography, now you're increasing dopamine responses where it's almost to the point of a hit of heroin. That's
Yeah.
what it's been leveled up as, and
Mm.
they've taken a period of time where they've also matched it with someone who's a porn addict, like a severe porn addict with an alcoholic, and they had the same type of brain scans that matched almost similar with each other. So there's
Yeah.
some damage there biologically to our brain, the structure of our actual brain.
Right.
And so we have to value just that in itself, those two
Mhm.
things, culturally and then the way it affects our biology. Now,
Right.
I think with pornography, it's very strange because I think back in like maybe the 70s up to the 90s and up until where the internet started, it was just like magazines, right?
Mhm.
So I think that was it seems there was maybe some innocence with that, but when it started to transform itself with internet, now you're capable of opening up your phone. Anyone really, like a 13-year-old, right? Or
Yeah.
a younger than that can open
Yep.
up their phone and access some really hardcore stuff. And I
Yeah.
think there's some damage to that at a very young
Oh,
age.
absolutely.
So and I can talk about myself, as an example, like I never really was taught about
Mm.
sex. My
Mhm.
parents never really gave me the birds and the bees conversation. It was
Yeah.
basic, but
Yeah.
I was never given like the true foundational context on how sex is used properly.
Mm.
And so I just learned and taught from neighborhood kids with porn. And
Yeah.
so my foundation of understanding sex, intimacy, all came through pornography. And
Mhm.
my my arousal was disjointed and my
Mhm.
ability to learn union and connection was disjointed. So for a very long time, I treated sex like a 13-year-old boy.
Mm.
And that's not a great foundation as I got older
Right.
and realized like that's where it all started for me, like my foundational network of understanding sex. And so when I got into relationships, there was the lack of union and intimacy that had no cornerstones to bounce back off of.
Yeah.
So I think that I can speak for a lot of array of men, who have the same exact thing. And
Right.
so as we understand relationship, we have to just be honest about it and not be ashamed of it. We just have to be real about it. And
Yeah.
so when we talk about porn, and I have not watched porn for a pretty good while. I
Mm.
cut that habit out of my system.
Yeah.
And so, but what I had understood after that was now I had to face another pattern that I created where I was an alcoholic, where for most of my
Yeah.
career of my younger age, had at least one drink of alcohol during intimacy or before intimacy.
Mm.
So when I
Yeah.
got sober and I started realizing I have not had sexual intercourse without alcohol in my system, that changed
Oh,
my
yeah.
arousal, things like that. So these are great things just to give the forefront where people can be like, oh my God, like I also had that same issue. And it gives a lot of help for people to be like, I'm not alone. I'm not going crazy. And so,
Right. Yeah. And I'm so glad you shared that because, yeah, as amazing as the evolution of technology has been, you're right. In 80s, even early 90s, it was magazines or some crusty VHS you found somewhere, right? Or DVD. Now I'm really dating myself. And there was a whole like delayed gratification even in that process to find the thing, find
mhm,
the device to play it on. Like it wasn't that quick hit that we get now. I think now you might not even be looking for porn or some type of
right.
sexually explicit image and it finds you,
Mhm,
right? It's like this automatic feed, like something that's like hoping for someone to catch. It's like this hook. And so I feel like it's almost like harder to avoid those things,
true.
especially if, you're on social media and have fun. But the awareness of how like the negative impact of the images and then the narrative that it starts creating around how you show up, how that person shows up. I feel like it not only makes sex transactional, but it ends up dehumanizing
Mhm,
both people. And then both people are like locked in this role of how to be and become objectified to a certain extent. And that's where with a lot of couples, and I would say even early on in our marriage, like we had kids, thank God, early in our marriage, which is what we wanted, right? We wanted to be parents by the age of 30. But I think most couples can relate, especially the wife. After kids, you don't even know what your body is anymore. It sucks, right? There's pains and places that there wasn't. Sex is the last thing on your mind because you're just trying to survive the nighttime, the daytime. It sucks for a long time. But sex is really important for a relationship, right? It adds another level of not just physical connection, but intimacy and emotional intimacy
mhm,
to a couple. And for myself, not having to like truly understand what it meant to the relationship, there was a long time that I had, in a sense, iced out my husband. And that
mhm,
created a lot of conflict and started to get resentful of, I feel like you're not really seeing me and understanding how challenging this is for me, given that now I feel like I'm in this juxtaposition of the truly the Madonna whore complex because 5 minutes before you're trying to come on to me, I'm breastfeeding, changing a poopy diaper. I'm sorry. The switch does not flip that quickly from dealing with the challenges of motherhood and now wanting to please you or even thinking about maybe I can orgasm too.
leave it to the fiery Latina to really speak some truth. And like, just like what is going on. And Haley said the same thing to me, in understanding, her cycles. And she's been
Oh
educating
yeah.
me for quite some time on the different I would say, eras during a cycle. Like when she says it's her luteal phase, she's like, not time to enter. And she literally
Mm.
said that to me the other day. And I was like, okay, I'm aware of that. And usually during the luteal phase, during her cycle, it's like I'm the enemy for about a week and a half, maybe
Mm.
2 weeks. And so I have to recognize sometimes I'm not doing something wrong, but I'm still the enemy. And
Right.
it seems to be like the same pattern, right? But I have to also not get caught up in my own shit about it. And
Right.
I know during the time where, she's ovulating, that's the time to go.
Right.
So, but if I'm working, and I get mandatory like other shifts during that time, it's like we know that intimacy is out the door and it's not the best time for intimacy.
Mhm.
So, I do want to take it back and kind of educate on, how I learned the sanctity of sex and how I
Mm.
understood the best framework to really levitate off of. And it really came from many different teachers and mentors that I've had over the years, some of them men, some of them women. And it really helped me to understand like what's really happening at a biological level to where I can become more of a master of myself and be able to sustain my body and my energy and my
Mhm.
vitality. And so one of them is understanding two different methods. One of them is you got yogic mystic traditions, and we also have ancient wisdom Chinese cultures. And
Mm.
so a lot of what I do is taking these frameworks, these ancient technologies, and bringing them on the forefront of the modern age, because a lot of what they talk about is not diagnostic. It's about understanding balance. It's about
Mm.
bringing vital health, and it really sustains, a lot of what we have forgotten for a very long time, to
Yeah.
where we do not understand the fundamentals. And so a lot of our problems come from not understanding a fundamental framework. So
Mhm.
part of what both of these cultures speak of on sex is that just even semen retention, understanding what
Mm.
semen is,
Mhm.
it is your essence. And Chinese medicine, they speak of it as the jing. It is the essence.
Mm.
And inside, yogic cultures, they call it the ohas. It is the
Mhm.
essence. And so, what I can frame it as is you can see the essence being more so as like the oil inside of an oil lamp. And
Mhm.
if the oil runs out, you're not going to have as much of a flame. And
Right.
this turns into chi or turns into life force. And
Mhm.
so for chi masters, they actually will retain their semen. And as you get older, you have to retain it longer because you have less life force as you age. And
Uh-huh.
so when you're able to understand what's circulating, chi masters will circulate this cosmic life force through their body, and they use it as a certain practice. They say that they pull
Mm.
it up their spinal cord through the back of their spine, and they bring it to the top of the head, and they
Wow.
bring it and down through the top and the front of their body, called the conception vessel. And so this has been referred to as the microcosmic orbit or the cosmic circuit. Now, this is like a very advanced technology that's been used. And
Mm.
some people say that if you use it inappropriately, you could actually cause symptoms like insomnia, palpitations, and various
Oh.
different people. Some people can go insane because this cosmic life force is very powerful.
Mhm.
And so this is the sanctity part of this, is that semen,
Mhm.
it this essence that we carry is it's very very precious, and we
Yeah.
don't value it as much as we should. And this is just kind of a very advanced way of looking at it, but it brings in more of a way we can look at it from a different point of view where we can value it a little more, how powerful it really
Right.
is.
Yeah.
And so just understand that when you are excreting this life force from you, it's special. So use it
Mhm.
appropriately. And
Right.
I did not treat my body like that. I did not
Mm.
understand any of this. And so
Yeah.
um just even my thoughts around sex, like in intimacy, I had to
Mhm.
realize I had to pull back my thoughts, because a lot of times I would go into, using pornography to stimulate me or get me
Mm.
aroused.
Yeah.
So even getting into what arousal was
Mhm.
really important, and that brought in a lot of transparency, a lot of embarrassment and shame
Mm.
around, how. I didn't know anything. I didn't want to ever talk about that or admit I was, just ignorant in
Yeah.
sexual intercourse or arousal. And so I think this is a really valuable thing. And even in yogic traditions, they have tantric yoga, which is
Mm.
different sexual positions,
Mhm.
but their main focus is primarily on union. That practice is about union.
Right.
It's not about orgasm. And
Yeah.
so a lot of these things, like one of those yogic practices in tantric yoga is just you're being in a position where you're penetrating and you're
Mhm.
in complete eye contact for about 15 to 20
Mhm.
minutes. That's a yogic practice. And so they value more so the union side of it rather than, pleasure. So
Right.
I hope hopefully that's helpful for different listeners, and people probably have never heard of this. But I
Right.
think it's really important just to kind of bring up how important and the sanctity of it.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned that because there's a big piece in relationships that requires the ability to have self-discipline in how you implement boundaries, and
Mm,
not just in the relationship, but for yourself. And when I hear you talking about like these, um, you know, ideas and beliefs and practices in these Eastern schools of thought, what comes up to me is wow, having not just the awareness of the sanctity around it, but then the willingness and ability to practice self restraint, because we live in a world that is wanting to, tempt us and lure us to see and believe and do things that are maybe much different, that are not um, are not in alignment with promoting self restraint.
mm,
Right? It's overconsumption, accessibility to everything, right? Like it doesn't matter. Or right, like how we talking about like reduces things. It makes
mm.
it transactional, objectification. And even tantric yoga. Oh my gosh, when you're talking about like penetration, just eye contact, it's like that is intense.
Yeah.
That's like a whole nother level of connection, amazing. But just even then, right, to have the self-restraint of not just rushing to the finish line of orgasm, but the
Mm,
willingness to restrain and to really be in the moment and be present. And that's even an incredible practice or idea to keep in mind, that through our lifespan and our relationship lifespan, in the beginning when we're young, right, and it's just chasing the pleasure that's at the end, that through like the lifespan of a relationship, at some point it starts to switch into where going through pleasure through a different lens of, we're not just seeking the orgasm or like the performance piece,
mm,
right? It's something else that's happening, a deeper level of connection and intimacy. We're really willing to enjoy the journey
mm.
of it all.
Yeah, thank you for saying that's such a well put way, that journey, right? It's not
Hmm.
about the finish line.
Yeah.
And there's I think a good lesson is like pay attention to your thoughts during intercourse
Yes. Yeah.
and also even after intercourse. And
Right.
so, and this is speaking from me coming from approaching sex with shame for a very long time because of how I was raised. I
Mm-hmm.
was raised in a very strict Pentecostal Christian network of
Mm-hmm.
thinking. And I was raised to believe, like, to have a lot of guilt, sin around sex. And
Mm-hmm.
so I brought that, not realizing until I had to go backwards in time and recognize where I learned a lot of my behaviors from and the
Yeah.
internal structure of how I would create emotion around sex,
Yeah.
because I was just raised like, hey, there it was shameful. Sex was always shameful, and also like having sex before marriage was shameful, and
Mm-hmm.
you're a sinner. You're gonna go to hell for that. And
Mm-hmm.
so there was like a lot of self punishment I carried
Mm-hmm.
around that in general. And so I
Yeah.
actually had to understand, where my behaviors came from.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people can be honest about that that's not true. And
Yeah.
just to give yourself some credit because you were taught something at a very young age and you're carrying it into a relationship and carrying shame. And man,
Mhm.
I've had so much shame come up because of my job and my libido.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so libido is way different for us because our stress levels, when our stress is high, cortisol raises up, hormones go down. That's
Mhm.
just the way that it works. And so when I'm
Survival.
coming off, yeah. So I worked in busy assignments for
Yeah.
years, and I would get off these, really long shifts and just be bogged down. And talking about my last relationship when we
Mm.
were living together, she was, I would call her a nympho, and she always wanted to have
Mm.
sex. And she was like, her sex drive was hyperactive and
Mhm.
mine was bogged down. This is also when I was like a rookie. So I
Uh,
was getting the extra stress
yeah.
from, getting beat down from guys at work and also getting beat down by the stress level of no sleep. And I was working in Hollywood at the time. So
Mm.
sleep was never capable of me like coming home being like, oh, I'm rested. And
Right.
and so her hyperactivity created a lot of shame for me because I wasn't performing to
Mhm.
her standard.
Yeah.
And it came down to the point where I would see like her, she would have vibrators and stuff in the shower.
Mm.
And I had created shame around it. Like, oh, I'm not matching up. I'm just not performing.
Yeah.
And so I physically was carrying shame where at the tip of
Yes.
my penis, I had this sensitivity for like months and I
Yeah.
didn't understand it. And
Yeah.
so going back to it, I had reconstructed what that was. And it was just shame manifesting in my
Mm.
body in a physical form.
Yeah.
And so I want people just to hear this and like just be like, man, like we are super intelligent human beings and we are super intelligent with our bodies. And shame is one of the lowest vibrational frequencies. And
Mm.
so if you're carrying that shame, it's something to look into. It's something to eradicate, not eradicate, but to transform.
Right.
Understand where it's coming from and also understand the relationship you have around shame in general.
Mhm. Absolutely. I'm so glad you bring that up, especially the aspect of religion, because that even ties into, right, the formation of this country and, right, the ideology, that it came from. And of course, I feel absolutely influences how this country, how you talked about, the thought and belief around sex. And, something in my practice that I offer for clients is that I am Catholic Christian. I do include faith, and we do talk about sex and intimacy. And even from that spiritual lens,
Mm,
the awareness that, through scripture, God, right, talks about we're made in his in a image and likeness. And if that's something that you believe, it's right. Well, he made us. That means on purpose, he put things in certain places. There is sensitivity in certain places that, right, sex was designed, if you are of Christian belief, from him. How we have sex, where where things enter and exit, right? There's a reason why it's maybe easier, better when you're facing your partner. There's more connection there, right? Because that is at the very base level. Like sex was designed for that level of intimacy, level of um, sacredness to be with husband and wife, as opposed to just with anybody or anything or whatever, right? But unfortunately, you're right. It had been villainized for such a long time because, hey, well, if we create fear around it, maybe they won't do it.
mm,
Maybe we could prevent, illegitimate children or, the challenges that come, I mean, STDs, shame, prostitution, like all the things, the unfortunate side that sexuality can, breed. But that's not good either, right? Because it's a part of us. We can't just deny puberty, the surgence of hormones, arousal, feeling things. And if no one's ever talked about it other than don't think about it, it's wrong, don't look, you're bad, like the whole extreme purity culture. like that then skews our perception of not just sex, but then ourselves. And yeah, we start creating this huge shame narrative of, I'm bad and I'm not going to be saved, or I shouldn't think this. But what I work with couples is like, okay, you've worked really hard to not have sex before marriage, but somehow when marriage happens, everyone's supposed to know how to do it. And somehow it's okay. This thing that in your mind for up till now, you wrote this narrative that it's bad, you shouldn't, how dare you, is something that you should seek, should want, should be having it all the time. And you should somehow be really good at pleasing your spouse too and know what to do. There are a lot of
Yeah,
couples
get it.
that are faced with that, and it breaks my heart because, right, that is something that is such a sacred piece to marriage that unless, like, the narrative starts changing, and I feel like it is, right, that no, like, this you shouldn't feel shame around it. Again, kinda going back to that school of thought of it being sacred, of practicing self-restraint and the discipline around it. And I feel like not just sex, but that's like in a lot of areas of our life, right? Of wanting to have self-control and the increase of self-confidence, self-dignity that comes from that too. But going back to sex and intimacy, of there being more openness around it. And I mean, with teenage boys, I've had to have the conversation of what you're going to see in porn is not real and is actually really damaging. And the majority of those people are on some type of drugs or have some type of brokenness that has pushed them into performing in that way and to using their bodies in that way. And it's an unfortunate reality. I feel like for parents, like, like I'm having to talk to them about it. Also, the reality of firewife that oftentimes I'm going to have to be the one that is dealing with more of these issues than my husband. And I'm going to have to have those conversations with them. And even as a sex and couples therapist, those conversations are still hard for me as a mom to have with my sons, but an
Yeah, and it's
important one.
powerful for sure. And it takes a high responsibility for you to have that conversation rather than some snot-nosed kid, 13-year-old
Yeah.
old boy, who's just like,
Yeah.
who doesn't have the education from his parents. And that's
Right.
usually what happens, within the kind of adolescent puberty age, and we have
Yeah.
an 11-year-old in our house and she's on the
Mm.
brink of that time frame. And we had
Yeah.
talked about it like, hey, I don't want some stupid kid that's gonna say some dumb shit
Right.
and ruin the sanctity of things. And so even with her menses that's coming up, we are aware that
Mhm.
that's happening, and we want to make it less shameful and make it more of a
Yeah.
celebration
Yeah.
of something like that happening, so she can start loving her body at a young age to not may not
Mhm.
be feeling like it's shameful and she has to be disturbed by something that has been biologically imbued in her as an intelligent system rather
Yeah.
than, being more educated on it. And I think that's huge for us
Yes.
as taking that responsibility to educate. And there's not a lot of parents who have that intimacy with their children to be able to connect
Mhm.
with them like that, where parents are working these, two full-time jobs when they're not at home and they
Mhm.
don't have that connection. And that's kind of like the deal with the rat race. Like the rat race has caused a lot of distraction to where we cannot be in connection with each other. And I feel
Right.
like that is one of the things that has caused a lot of destruction within our culture and within each other and within our general health.
Mhm.
And I think, if I was an elite member trying to run a global population and to disturb them, I would hijack sex immediately. And that's exactly what has happened, to cause
Yeah.
a lot of confusion, to cause a
Mhm.
lot of separation. And
Mhm.
look at the world right now. I mean, that's exactly what's going on. And
Mhm.
and also even capitalizing on top of it.
Oh,
So
yeah.
if you just think about that concept for a second and realize like the people who are in charge want you to be sick, want you to be diseased and confused and not love yourself. So
Mm.
just understanding that zoomed out view, I think really helps
Mhm.
us in giving us our autonomy back to where we can now step into a role where like, okay, I need to make some changes. And when I
Right.
talk about making changes, especially for men, I'm speaking to you guys, make small changes. Do not do things all at once, because I know firefighters for sure want to just tackle it all at once and just
Yeah.
spearhead it straight
Mhm.
on. Do not do that. Just because I know for myself, if I'm going to start exercising and improving parts of my body and I start on that, if I tackle it all at once, I'm not going to follow through. So if I do
No.
things little by little, especially working through injuries of the past years, if I did small steps, then I was able to have some productivity and some type of transformation through that role. But if I did it all at once, I realized I would just fall short. And so that is a good skill set to use. It's just taking small bites rather than eating it all at once. And just thinking
Yeah.
about how we do things. We want it now. We want to be the expert, and we want to just be the best. This perfectionistic trait that most
Mm.
firefighters carry as well. Just know that you're not perfect, and just knowing you can love yourself by the imperfections of who you are. That's the best way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that because, yes, we are in this, I feel we've been conditioned to want things yesterday. And so the change should be done by tomorrow. But, that sets us up to fail, which is exactly what then keeps us in that shame spiral, in that sick
Mm,
cycle also, right? Because it's unrealistic. And that's how I work with my clients too. Like, hey, I know that we have this big issue we need to tackle, but we're not going to have it all wrapped up in like 2 sessions. We need to start making small pivots because also our brain, as sophisticated as it is, has like these unhealthy or toxic behaviors have deep roots. And those roots, although the behavior is negative, it's causing like a negative impact, those deep roots have justified it in a way that your brain more so sees the benefits
mm.
of these behaviors rather than logically, oh yeah, this is bad, I shouldn't do it, I'm just going to stop. Because oftentimes these behaviors are also attached to belief systems
Mm.
that need altering in order for us and our brains to feel safe to change. Because, like, going back to, what you shared about you and Haley and the amazing conversation that you guys had about truth, that her idea, her definition of truth came from somewhere.
Mm.
Right? And I'm sure there was a lot of conversations, okay, but what does that look like? What does that mean? You having to look at how you define truth and how
Mm.
honest you want to be. And where does the line of like me end and us begin? Because we still need to maintain individuality. I actually don't believe we have to share everything with our spouses, right? Like there has to be something that's still ours so that we don't then start acting out and create something that is ours and start
Mm.
creating secrets in other ways, right? But in realizing that our behaviors aren't just behaviors, there's belief systems that have been attached to them that justify them. And oftentimes that's a big piece of this whole equation that there has to be more of an like awareness, um, accepting sometimes of like, this is my belief around this. And how do I then start modifying it so that it's in alignment with that change that I'm seeking? Because if there isn't that, then your brain's not going to buy in and it's going to be easy to just stay in the comfortability of the unhealthy behaviors.
No, 100%. And yeah, I love how you were mentioning how about beliefs, because beliefs are powerful. I
Absolutely.
think they're one of the most powerful things that are out there.
Mhm.
And uh, even going into so it, I can give a framework around beliefs, because initially you always hear relationships are hard,
Mhm.
and I had to take a step back and say, is that true? I played this game with myself. It's called the cold hard truth, where I
Mhm.
sit down for 15 minutes and like a meditation, and I ask myself the cold hard truth questions, and I get it. It's a yes or no answer to certain things, and it challenges what's true and what's an illusion I've created for myself.
Yeah.
And so when I ask the cold hard truth questions, it's really amazing to see what worries and fears I've created and manifested from something that's not real.
Yeah.
And when I had understood that actually relationships are not hard, it's actually hard to lay down my sword. It's
Yeah.
hard to open up my heart. It's
Mhm.
hard to just pull back from my pride. It's
Mhm.
hard to tell the truth when I don't want to. And so
Right.
those things were hard. And I had to look
Yeah.
at, well, why are those things hard? Why have I created those things to become difficult?
Yeah.
Because when I send that message out into the quantum field, I'm just going to get a reverberation of that information right back to me. Yeah, it's hard. Here you go. It's hard until
Right.
you realize it's not hard. And
Yeah.
so when I had realized that it was hard to open up my heart, I had to look at, okay, why is that? And it came from so much. It came from growing up, my parents getting divorced when I was 18, and I held a lot of resentment
Mm.
around that. It came from me protecting myself from a girl breaking my heart when I was 13 years old. So all of
Mm.
these things that were supporting my belief system
Yeah.
were now dismantling those false belief systems into reorienting myself in truth and anchoring myself in my heart.
Yeah.
Now, is that easy? It depends, like I
Mm.
said, how you look at it. So,
Yeah.
but opening up our heart brings us to deep hurt that we don't want to face. I think that's the hard part for most of us.
Yeah.
And with that comes a lot of grief and sorrow. So doing this work and understanding the quality of the heart and mending the mind heart connection became a anchor point in the relationship, and it became a focal point how we see each other. And when I can look at myself and say, I can see who I am, now it
Mhm.
gives me more opportunity to be able to open up to seeing Haley face to face.
Mhm.
And that becomes with a lot of practice. And there comes moments in time where that doesn't just happen right off the bat.
Yeah.
And I think we just don't have the context where people don't understand the complexity of who we are.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
think I'm so happy that you work with so many different types of couples, and you give the opportunity to have so many different ideas on how couples are operating. It's crazy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Couples, I love working with couples, not only because, gosh, like every session can like be a standalone like therapy journey on its own,
Yeah.
but it really helps in expediting personal growth too.
Mm,
Because then you have, right, the person who probably knows you the best now in your life, or should. If not, that's another issue. But that can call you out on your shit in session. Oh, like, hold on. That's actually not what you do. You do this instead. Or this is how I experience you. Because we have, right? We have our blind spots. And that's why relationships, we're a species of relationships, right? Because with a relationship, and going back to your thought of relationships are hard, because yeah, the person will probably put up with your shit for so long, but at some point they're going to call you out on it, and
mm,
that's not going to feel good, and it's going to suck. And then what do I do next? And is that really me? Like the acceptance, like, oh my gosh, am I really showing up this way? Am I really impacting them in that way too? And that sucks. But relationships are designed to, well, I guess healthy ones and even unhealthy ones, you try to call each other out in probably unhealthy ways, but that's part of this process, right? Of I want to be with you, but this thing that you're doing, or how you think about this, or how you feel about this, is making it really hard to be with you. And something that you brought up that I wanted to touch on really quick is the grief process that's necessary in order to grow. Because in detaching, or right, detaching from those belief systems, because now you see how they're creating obstacles for you, then there is a period of mourning, because it's not just the belief itself, but maybe the ideas that were the seeds to those beliefs.
mm.
And that grief process, the reality is a lot of us don't know how to grieve in a healthy way. It's usually, oh, that sucked, let me distract myself and move on. right? Like we typically haven't really learned from our families, maybe, and our families probably didn't even know like a healthy way to grieve. So something that I want to share with those listening is there's a book called The Grief Recovery Handbook. Has that come across your work with people, or have you heard of that work,
I
of
never
that
heard of
book?
it.
So the book, a couple things that I really love about it is written by two men who are not mental health professionals as far as like therapists or psychologists, but they have those lived experiences of different kinds of losses. Because like the grief that we're talking about, as far as like detaching from belief systems and creating new ones, is a loss, and our brain is mourning it much like it would mourn and grieve a physical death, right? But oftentimes, knowing how to grieve those other kinds of non-death losses, either people don't validate those as losses or just don't know how to do it. So the book really honors different kinds of losses: divorce, bankruptcy, loss of career, right? And helps to lay out a different way of not just defining loss, but also grief, and helps the person then create a whole new grieving process through a series of questions and activities to help you get through the other side, that at some point you don't have to continue to grieve this forever. Like there could be closure to that. And that's huge because grief can be like an open tab in the background that's consuming energy, and emotions and causing behaviors if the grief isn't brought to a closure, which it is possible to do that. You don't have to grieve forever.
Yeah, I mean that it can be a long road to understand
Yeah.
how much grief we hold. And
Yes.
that's why I had mentioned understanding the mind heart connection, because
Yeah.
bringing that online gives us a really a large body of wisdom to
Mhm.
understand how we navigate ourselves, how we navigate our actions. And man, I come on here and I don't have this ultimate poise when I speak about these things. Like
Mhm.
I've been through the mud of trying to process, these
Yeah.
things and these ruts that I put myself in, and coming to acceptance is huge. And I've
Mm.
accepted the fact that I'm a bit of a psychopath. I've accepted the fact that I have narcissistic traits. I've accepted the fact that I'm an asshole. And
Mhm.
I've been transparent with Haley about that. And that's the thing, is like we try to not leave any stone unturned. And the more I am honest about my sinister strategies that I have around trying to manipulate her sometimes,
Yeah.
I've been really open about it. Like, hey, I've had this trait for that I've had for years that worked for a very long time on manipulation, but it
Yeah.
doesn't work in a relationship. And so that's what you had mentioned too, is like our relations with each other is showing us what we don't see. And it's that shadow
Mhm.
that's in the back that's been haunting you for a very long time. And when that's revealed, there can be a grieving process around that. And
Yeah.
so, like, when we give ourselves the humility and respect for ourselves and each other, that really leaves a better like catapult to come off of, because it puts us into transformation. It puts us into personal evolution, relationship evolution. And
Yes.
when we also understand grief, uh, it's just it's hard to put that into context unless you experience it. And that's, I love how this book is more about personal experience, because a
Mhm.
lot of people are tired of therapists and psychologists and professionals talking about these things. But when you
Yeah.
have someone talk about a lived experience and
Right.
they're vulnerable about opening up how they came across to the other side, that
Yeah.
has much more power and validity to it than a
Yeah.
professional speaking on, the contextual ways on way we label things,
Yeah.
diagnose it. And I think for firefighters in our world, we are tired of that, because we're in a world of a lot of logic, a lot of strategic
Mm.
labeling, and we live in an organized fashion in a world of
Mm.
chaos.
Yeah.
And so when we hear stories that are relational, it brings us
Mhm.
to let down our guard a little bit from protecting
Yeah.
ourselves with that world.
Right.
And when we start to just hear like personal experience, we're like, wow, I'm not crazy. I'm not alone. And that's
Yeah.
what really brought this mental health movement down to everyone's knees. Because we
Mm,
started seeing stories about these people who are struggling with addiction, who are struggling with things that were just eating them up and then brought them down all the way to suicide ideation.
yeah.
And I think right now that's really what we're seeing. And we want more of those personal experiences told.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad you said that because, in thinking about like tying in like grief and shame to that and the ability then to be transparent and the challenges around that, especially within agencies, right? And because I feel unfortunately there's still very much right that stigma of if they really see me, am I going to be treated the same? Am I still going to have a job? Which makes it hard sometimes to have these kinds of conversations, right? Because no one talks, or I shouldn't say no one. It's not as openly talked about of what is the mental and emotional shitstorm that happens from that traumatic call to then, sure, you were trained on compartmentalizing really well, but then how do you deal with it afterwards? Like somehow, oh, your brain's just going to flush it and then you're going to be okay.
Mm,
No, it's going to show up in other ways, right? And I think if there was more honesty about that, right? Something for me that I had to come to terms with my husband was okay, his irritability is not me doing things wrong. I have to be aware of not taking it personally,
mm,
or the challenge is just in transitioning home, right? And him decompressing and understanding that his nervous system is on high alert, hypersensitivity while on the job for a lot of different reasons, not just calls. That if I'm not aware of that and helping to meet him where he's at and letting go of those expectations and just thinking about my needs of when he walks through the door, like that's setting us up to fail. And so I'm glad that, you realize like between you and Haley, like you have to have that open line of communication of letting her know of like how you're showing up. Like, where are you on the scale? And that's something that I implemented with my husband early on when he was working. Or he was on an assignment that was pretty busy for quite a few years, of realizing like I have to know who's coming in, who's coming home. Because also at that time, since we were fortunate enough to start having children at a younger age, and of course we had them back to back because goalie was pooled. He's not coming back in if he's out. So our boys are 14 months apart. Um, like the realities of like, okay, I can't just hand them kids and run out the door. Like that's not going to work. As much as I want to do that with him, right? Like I have to figure out how was his night. Okay, it sucked. Yeah, mine sucked too. But I can like, I feel like navigate that perhaps a little bit better with kids than he can. So how is it going to look like for us? And having that conversation of, okay, your night sucked. How much time do you need? And being flexible with whatever is coming home. But also, if he needs more time, then so be it. It's going to have to be more time because I'd rather us be honest than continue to set each other up to fail each other.
Yeah, I think a good skill is to give yourself a number. Anyone who's
Yeah.
coming off shift, you give yourself a number. Like, hey, I'm at a 10. And when you're
Hmm.
driving home, and most of us have a decent commute coming home,
Yeah.
to house or whatever. So give yourself that number, and then that gives us an opportunity to gauge, like, okay, what can I do to bring that number down? And then also
Yeah.
being transparent with whoever you're coming home um,
Yes.
to what that is. And so that gives
Yeah.
us a better idea of what we're dealing with at the time. And so
Right.
I always prioritize, I don't want to dump all my shit on my family when I come home
Right.
because it's not their fault that I'm
Hmm.
on edge from lack of
Hmm.
sleep or on edge from just irritability over a 72-hour shift. Like
Yeah.
I can't expect them to try to prioritize me when I've done nothing for that. I have to take full responsibility at some point.
Mhm.
So, and I can't expect Haley who also works a full-time job, to be like,
Mm.
okay, I'm coming in, I'm your mother, like, and just having that response.
Yeah.
So sometimes she does do that, and sometimes she doesn't. But
Mhm.
I also can't expect her to be that way. And like we talked about before, like expectations are the root of all heartache.
Yeah.
But if you are, a partner that's welcoming your spouse in like that, you're also enabling a little bit
Yeah.
with that behavior to continue.
Right.
So setting boundaries that are efficient to not bridge that continuation of behavior over is important. And
Right.
this is coming from just my own stuff coming
Yeah.
up over the years of me coming home from long shifts. I mean, I've been working platoon 24-hour shift schedule since I was 19. So
Mm.
like it's a lifestyle I've lived for such a long time. And it's up
Yeah.
to like 18 years now of me living like this. It's all I know and understand. When I
Mhm.
first started for like the first block of time working in this schedule, I was really irritable and really angry, like when I didn't get sleep. So
Yeah.
I managed that and matured it over time to where I didn't spit that out to people and like project that.
Yeah.
But now I'm working with trying to understand my relationship with anger because I've suppressed it for such a long period of time.
Mm.
So just understand our human nature and recognizing the humanness in us is one of the most forefront experiences we have to face, and
Right.
not being afraid to be angry and just
Yeah.
accepting that when anger does come up is important as well. And so
Yes.
there's a fine line and balance between like how we manage our projections and also just not wanting to stifle our emotions. So it's a very fine line with that as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think for most, men and women, we have, there's a lot of us who've been conditioned to not even be able to, see the emotions, right? Or to acknowledge them. And especially in the first responder world, right? A big piece of the work is compartmentalizing and not letting your emotions get in the way, right? Which is, I mean, gosh, it's like the essence of our human existence is like we are emotional beings, right?
Mhm.
Because when you swing the pendulum the other way and you're emotionless, we're not robots. And so that creates a whole nother level of turmoil. So,
Mhm.
to your suggestion of like for guys to pick a number on their way home, oftentimes it's even recognizing I might not even be aware of how emotionally activated I am, like on a subconscious level, right? So I would even say, like, whether the night was good or bad, or we create like our whole own little like metric system of like what is traumatic, what isn't, right? Like, just know, like, you're coming off from something where your nervous system has been cranked up. So you have to implement something, whether you're fully aware of it or not. There needs to be some type of transition and decompression of your nervous system so that you can show up as a better version of yourself when you walk through the door.
Yeah, I totally agree. And man, I mentioned nervous system regulation at work, and
Mhm.
guys look at me like I'm fucking crazy. But I think it is
Yeah.
one of the core foundational things our bodies are relating to. And over time, I've explained it to the best way to explain it to firefighters are it's
Mhm.
basically it's an electrical circuit. And
Yes.
so when you are overriding that circuitry, like let's say you're at a 20 amp circuit and you're overriding that with extra wattage, it's going to pop. So that's when we get
Mhm.
shut down. Our bodies will shut down with injury. And
Mhm.
that's where a regulated nervous system is a sense of safety.
Yeah.
And for years, speaking for myself, I was numb to
Mhm.
anything. I didn't feel
Mhm.
anything because my breaker had popped a long time ago. And I
Yeah.
was running on an amperage and a wattage that was overriding the capacity for that conduit to hold any power. So
Mhm.
my body would shut down and
Yeah.
my brain activity would shut down or be overriding like excess thoughts. And so
Mhm.
that's the best context for anyone to understand who's listening, to just really just, it's an electrical system. Okay.
Yeah.
And you don't want to override it. So when you come home and you got babies at home and that's causing even more overriding of your nervous system, it's time to take a step back and reposition yourself. Okay. What can I do to stimulate vagal tone? What can I
Yeah.
do to go into a state of rest? And
Mhm.
most of us don't want to rest when we come home. We feel like we got to do all these
Right.
different tasks and we
Yeah.
have a honey-do list and we want to get
Mhm.
yelled at. So being
Mhm.
transparent, like I tell Haley, hey, I'm going to decompress for a little bit. I'm at this level and I need to decompress, ground in, rewire my nervous system for a second before I take on your task. And if I don't finish your list, then I don't finish your list. And that's kind
Yeah.
of like the priority I set for myself, the boundary I had set. And she's okay with that. You know, the part that she gets mad at is if I don't listen to her. Like she had said something and I didn't hear her at all because I was so
Um,
bogged down and I'm not
yeah.
able to hear. So like
Right.
these practices are so important for everyone to just understand, like give yourself a list of practices you can do. And a lot of guys, I always see surfers who are firefighters are the most chill out of everyone because
Uh,
they go surfing, they go in the ocean, they dump out all their shit inside that salt water, they come back refreshed. And those guys are the chillest dudes to work with.
yeah. That, gosh, nature is so healing. Movement is so healing, right? It's helping to circulate stuff, but you're able to disconnect to a
Mhm.
certain extent, right? And yeah, that awareness of there's other things that my brain is dealing with that I'm not consciously aware of is important because it is, right? Thankfully, we don't have to think about um, our heart pumping its blood or our lungs having to think about. Like, that's not on our conscious mind, right? The brain's taking care of it in the back end. Same as how it's processing, compartmentalizing, dealing with whatever was seen on shift, lack of sleep, how maybe what was seen or felt is connecting to something from way in the back end of your brain from childhood or something. That our so that alarm system, that almond-sized shape structure, the amygdala, is something that I'm so glad there's more research being done, more awareness of how the amygdala, if it is, that metaphor you use of electricity and wattage, if it's been turned up for such a long time, our brain being as sophisticated as it is going to meet that need, right? It's a thermostat, but there's only so much it can meet until everything shuts down, right? Or it starts to figure out ways of, okay, how can I deal with this in a maybe passive way where I'm not really dealing with it? I'm just getting that instant gratification and that dopamine hit and kind of like soothing, where, whether it's going back to unhealthy coping skills or figuring out like if home life is so volatile, let me just sign up for another shift. Let me just avoid. Let me go create another life with someone else. Like there's so many things that our brains will conjure up because it's figuring out how do I survive since this person is not helping me turn down the dial. I need to figure something out.
Yeah, 100%. And a good skill set is asking yourself if you're relaxed and
Yeah.
calm. And if you're not relaxed and calm, and that was one of the things we had set between Haley and myself in a relationship. Like
Mhm.
we, we're not going to have a conversation if we're not an 8 for 8 with trust and
Mhm.
openness.
Yeah.
And so, with that, in order for me to get to trust and openness, I have to ask
Mhm.
myself, am I calm and relaxed? So I won't even get to that point of us having a conversation about something that's bothering her or bothering me unless I am in that state, because that's going to be a foundational set point for me to see, hey, can I now lean into trust and openness to now have this conversation that we need to discuss? And
Yeah.
so that state is really going to help you. So, okay, that state, if you're not calm and relaxed, that has to do with the nervous system. And that's going to be the ability for you to use a certain practice to see, I can bring this down from like a 10 to like a 6. And then I can get into
Yeah.
that point of being able to transform whatever needs to be manifested. So that kind of goes into what I was going to ask you about was libido,
Mm,
because libido is a huge issue with men and women, of course. But
yeah.
in this first responder community, understanding libido, what it is, we don't want to push past that threshold. And I'm curious what your experiences are with libido.
So, gosh, libido, one of those, one of the many things that has a lot of other beliefs and emotions that affect it too,
Mm,
other than physiologically, right? If your nervous system's taxed out, it's going to be hard to access, that mental framework to even start the whole biological process around it, right? And I think in part of the conversations with couples, especially, and even for myself with my husband too, that unfortunately it's been stereotyped that men just have this endless libido that's
mm,
high. It doesn't matter what they've gone through. They are just always ready, seeking it and whatnot. Maybe it's truer than women, but still, like, right, there's that stereotype, that stigma that's placed around it and attached to men too about what libido and masculinity and men and all that. But if you're gosh, this connects to central nervous system because if that is, if that dial is all the way up and you're very much in your head, maybe even not knowing it, like it's going to be so hard to access your libido or for it to be online,
mm,
right? And often what I see with couples who are healing from betrayal, then the men or even women too, whoever was the one who betrayed, then is having to deal with anxiety around performing around sex, that it creates this performance anxiety
mm,
where men are unable to get erections and women are unable to lubricate. And so knowing that, gosh, there's more to it and like this sacredness around it, this care that needs to be had of how am I taking care of myself so that even sexually I'm able to show up in that way for myself and my partner. That it isn't just something that happens on its own that I don't have an influence or a say over. That in thinking about like this is something that also needs attention and how am I taking the care of the other aspects of myself that is going to have a direct influence on libido too. So things that I've seen really affect or have the greatest impact for, let's say, the least amount of effort is sleep, nutrition, coping skills, like giving yourself space to like reconnect with yourself, right? Like assessing, like, what do I need? Where am I at?
mm.
So that I'm able to then have the mental and emotional bandwidth to connect and give to others.
Yeah, you make a lot of good points there, and even talking about like the creation of the ideas around libido
Hmm.
is important to understand and to reflect on. And just in for us as first responders, the long shifts, the stress load, our libido is all over the place. And guys will say, "Oh, I don't have a problem with libido," but they're overriding. They don't understand they could be overriding that
Yeah.
libido when their nervous system is already tripping a breaker, like I had
Hmm.
mentioned before. So, like I had mentioned, also is like understanding that semen retention and
Yeah.
also using that to your advantage. There's like this no fapping culture. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
No.
Well,
What's
it's
that?
basically the fact that for men, you don't masturbate until you have intercourse. That's come up over the years,
Okay.
and you're edging
Oh,
basically.
okay. Yeah.
So that's kind of like that culture, but that also is taken away from the sanctity of the semen retention I had mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
But libido is our testosterone levels are really at a low within just our culture in general. Like they
Yeah.
had done some studies where the max, like in the 70s, testosterone was through the roof with men, and it was like 700-800 levels, and then now they've lowered that normal to 600 is like a good number. That's like one
Oh.
of the max for testosterone.
Mm.
And because we've been just overwhelmed with microplastics and these things, these environmental toxins that have affected testosterone in men, and now if you add with those environmental toxins, microplastics, all this bullshit that are affecting our hormones, you add stress and cortisol to that. Now our
Yeah.
testosterone's super low. There's a lot of guys who are taking supplemental T because they can't have kids anymore. And
Right.
even that can be harmful when it can be a lifeline for some, but it could also be really harmful because you're telling the body to create this. And when you stop taking it, you go cold turkey. Now your
Oh, yeah.
body's not going to want to make it any longer.
Right.
So there's some tricks to libido. Obviously, sleep is super important with libido. When I come in off a shift, my libido is a little bit low, but sometimes I come like I'm like this primal animal. So it's just
Mm.
very strange
Yeah.
when I'm like taking into account what my libido is like.
Mm.
But I've taken some supplements that really helped me and guys at the firehouse. One of them was a supplement called the whole package, which
Okay.
was it's dehydrated liver and beef liver and also beef testicle that's dehydrated. And so just
Oh.
taking that had increased my libido and also my testosterone levels. I was raising my testosterone levels by 200 by just taking that supplement, which is
Yeah.
organic in nature. And you're not screwing up the way you're creating testosterone in the body. You're naturally, over time, feeling a difference in vital health and vital
Mhm.
energy along with that libido pickup. And then,
Yeah.
like, another great skill is like if you have a red light panel, using that for 15 to 20 minutes on the perineum increases
Mm.
that ability to, number one, it's a very grounding technique and also brings in more of that testosterone levels just by putting light there.
Yeah.
It stimulates a lot of that around the perineum to create more
Mm.
testosterone.
Mhm.
And so these are really great exercises to use. Those are just two I'm going to mention.
Yeah.
But there's also like in Taoist techniques, it's that edging technique. If you just get an erection and get to like a 7 where you're edging and you bring that back in, that
Mhm.
creates more libido and more testosterone building within the testes. So
Yeah.
that's a ancient Taoist technique that I don't recommend for a lot of people. And when I told guys this at work, they think I'm fucking crazy when I'm saying stuff like this. But I've learned from chi
Yeah.
masters, like a great chi master anyone can look up on Instagram would be Montauk Chia. He's a chi master who specializes in libido and also in sexual energy that's cultivated within
Mm.
the chi field. So
Yeah.
like some of these things can be really fascinating, and also you're learning some of the techniques and knowledge based off Chinese medicine on how to increase some of these things that you won't really learn much from Western medicine. But
Right.
libido is just a weird one too, because women, we have to respect women's libido. And
Yeah.
I'm still trying to understand the women's cycle. And I was just messing with Haley the other day. I was like telling her I'm gonna get a bumper sticker that says I love my crazy wife. Because like within each part of her cycle, like she can be kind of crazy. I'm like, hey, you're fucking crazy. And then we'll just mess around with that concept.
Yeah.
I'm curious about women's libido.
Yeah.
And even for women who are a first responder and listening to this, I've heard a lot of women having issues where they stop having a period.
Mm.
And I'm like, sometimes I tell these girls, like, hey, like, pay attention to your hormone levels because you're actually more highly affected than men are with your hormone skills.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, to understanding the cycle, I would say as women, we are still also trying to understand our own cycle.
Right.
And it just the impact that each week, and it's unsettling to I feel, at least for me, unsettling to think like, gosh, each week it could look so different. I could be so different. And I don't necessarily have a say. To a certain piece, I can with the awareness, the coping. I always recommend women to track their period. There's a lot of great apps that do that, some that also allow you to input symptoms, um, emotions, physiologically, right? Because so many things can change from week to week. And for women's libido, I like to educate couples in that we need to think about it as there needs to be like a slow drip system, if you will. Like there's constant
Okay.
communication, right? Which can be hard when your spouse is gone for days or weeks at a
Mm,
time. And so for the couple to realize like we need to create or maintain connection even when you're not physically present, that is huge. And that helps to like always keep that libido watered and sustained, right? Like if there's some piece that still it doesn't go like into dormancy, right? Because if a big impact on our libido is emotional safety.
mm.
And if we're not feeling emotional safety, like why are we then going to put ourselves in one of the most physically vulnerable states that we can be as women? Like the two can't coexist, right? I mean, they can, but then that creates a whole nother host of issues for the couple and for the women themselves, which oftentimes women do end up bypassing like their own alarm system of we shouldn't do this, you don't want to do this, just in wanting, right, to keep the peace, to try to just keep things going. But then that breeds its own level of disconnection and contempt within a couple that I see very often, like as the relationship progresses, intimacy decreases and it becomes harder and harder to access that genuineness of desire. And that's where a lot of often men report of, I don't feel like she wants me anymore. She doesn't look at me. She doesn't talk to me. And but little there wasn't any conversations like when things started happening long ago of like, hey, when you just show up and expect me to like fall all over you or have done all the things before you walk through the door and then I'm feeling guilted and shamed that I haven't, it doesn't make me feel like emotionally connected or safe with you. If you don't ever want to listen to me, like that's how I connect. Like I think a big piece of libido for both ends is having a true understanding of how both people connect with each other and what's needed in order to feel connection and that safety with each other so that you're able to be more considerate of like, oh, he needs this to connect. It might not be my favorite, but I understand and I'm willing to do that, like and having like your own right set of boundaries within that spectrum too.
That's really helpful, especially like understanding like a slow drip system.
Yeah.
And emotional safety.
Yeah.
I've worked around that with myself, like where there was a moment in time where I did some really deep work on my mother wound, and I
Mm,
was going through a lot of emotions around grief, sorrow, understanding forgiveness, and it was relating to the feminine.
yeah.
And during that time, I had a hard time getting an erection. And
Mm,
because I was emotionally unstable, working through
okay.
a wound I held deep in my heart. And during that time, I had to be open with Haley about it. Like, hey, like I'm working through something really, really dark right now that I have to face. And if I don't face this, I'm gonna project it onto you subconsciously. And so
Yeah.
it was beautiful because instead of it having sexual intercourse, we created this intimacy with each other through vulnerability, balance, and
Mm,
harmony, where there was just this, we grew from that as a couple. And I'm like, even like tearing up right now talking about it because it
mm,
was so powerful. It was a moment in our relationship where nothing was, uh, nothing was hidden. You know, we were just talking about, what had happened in my life. And that was
yeah.
so important how it just manifested into a greater essence of love for each other.
Yeah.
And for me to be honest about that, like
Yeah.
most men are afraid to talk about something like that. And there's so much shame surrounding that performance mechanism
Mm,
when it's a mechanism that's being supported by emotional stability. And
right.
it's also in relation to our hearts.
Yeah.
And when you want to talk about some esoteric knowledge in the energetic system that we're created with, we have these software systems in our body. And our sacral is about creation. It's about creativity. It's about our life force. It's about our ability to have reproduction. And that
Mhm.
sacral energy software system is connected in tandem to our heart.
Yeah.
So when that is not in a cycle with itself, then there's going to be some disturbance. And the same is for women. Women are
Mhm.
not going to feel super stimulated to have sex with their man if they feel emotionally unstable, if they don't feel like I am safe to open my heart to this man when he's acting like an asshole and a dick. So
Right.
it makes total sense. And
Yeah.
there's behind the curtain, there's so much that we don't understand, and we will project our own egotistical self-righteousness onto someone
Right.
when we don't want to take advantage of taking responsibility for our actions and how
Yeah.
we're pushing all this shit on someone else's shoulders and then expect, hey, now please me.
Right. Yeah. Forget about what just happened. Are you ready? Yeah, absolutely. And have you heard of that book, The Body Keeps the Score?
Absolutely.
Right? That's a big one.
Yeah.
And in talking about like that sacral heart connection, right? I feel like one of the most vulnerable yet powerful poses is like a butterfly pose for both men and women,
Mhm.
right? Of just laying there and, gosh, I probably won't describe it well. So help me out of like feet, you know, touching each other, bottoms of the feet, legs open for people who don't know what a butterfly pose is, right? Like
Mhm.
your pubic bone is exposed, everything's exposed, but you're
Mhm.
laying there, right? And if you were to just lay there, and I've had to do that for myself of like healing and processing old wounds of how did I define sexuality for myself? How did I see myself as a sexual being? Of being willing to let go of the shame that had been attached to that, or how I had manipulated certain things in seeking validation and acceptance from men. And just in laying there and being attuned to what is my body doing, what emotions are surfacing, now what thoughts are coming, I think is such a healing process of its own, of having that just awareness of what comes from just doing something as simple as that.
Oh, 100%. Our bodies are intelligent, and those postures,
Yeah.
they've been formulated on an intelligent level
Yeah.
because our body reflects our psychology. And so
Right.
a lot of times when you're putting yourself in vulnerable postures, like what happens when you are in a state of butterfly,
Yeah.
you're open. And
Yeah.
so openness uh, kind of invites this vulnerability, and it
Yeah.
invites thoughts that are
Yeah.
coming from a state of not being open. So we
Mhm.
can transform what comes up from a posture because our we have suppressed something. The problem I have about The Body Keeps the Score, it was an
Mm.
amazing book, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of talk, but there's not a lot of action and context of
Mm.
how to
Mhm.
overcome what
Mhm.
the body is holding. And
Yeah.
so when you're inviting somatic release and you're inviting
Mhm.
somatic practices, that is really what helps with the issues that are in the tissues to transform from.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of people who, especially when I work with men, I put them into somatic practices and they don't
Mhm.
like it. It's so uncomfortable for
Yeah.
them
Mhm.
because it they don't understand it, number one, and there's a lot of judgment around it, number two. And so but these are so intelligently integrated into our psychology, into our traumas, and the stuff
Yeah.
we're holding on to. But when we can let go of our judgments, that's the first step when we're
Mhm.
actually imbuing somatic work. And the
Mhm.
beautiful part about the butterfly is that it's the miracle of metamorphosis.
Yeah.
And through that process of the caterpillar inside the chrysalis, is that if someone tries to assist with that butterfly trying to get out of the chrysalis, you actually can break its wings. Through that process of transformation, the individual itself, the organism itself needs to go through that disturbance and that struggle to release itself and fully transform.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful concept, and we have to just recognize the beauty in nature and how it is becoming a
Mm.
creature on these
Yes.
simple concepts. But when you're going into a pose, you're
Yeah.
like, now you're like, oh, I'm transforming things literally
Right.
in real time.
Yes, absolutely. I find that people would prefer to be physically naked as opposed to emotionally naked.
Mm,
Somehow being emotionally naked is just so vulnerable and so fearful that the level of like transparency and connection and intimacy that we want with our spouses requires emotional nakedness. And to allow your spouse to see you, to like really see you, to see the brokenness, to see the narratives, maybe the beliefs that, you know, you are just coming to realize for yourself. Like that is not just powerful, but so freeing that then you can really show up to that person and not be afraid that they're going to reject you or they're going to abandon you.
mm. Yeah, I mean, it's really powerful to see one another,
Mhm.
with our inner vision, not
Yeah.
our naked eye. And yeah, over time, there's skills that you have to start to cultivate to have more of a grounded sense that you're tethered within yourself to start to become that, to be more vulnerable. And
Right.
people, for men in my generation and upper generations, we just see vulnerability as weakness
Yeah.
when it's actually a gift, it's actually a skill. And
Yes.
it men who I come across who are more open about their vulnerability, I've seen them as great mentors, and
Mm.
they've helped me lead my life in a different way. And I think there's a big movement happening with that. And there's just still not as much context. And I just
Mhm.
talked about this on a different episode. Is like we're lacking context with fundamentals, and
Mm.
a good way you can formulate it is the king and the queen died.
Mm.
Now, when I said that, what does that mean? Nothing. Okay,
Mhm.
the king and the queen died of a broken heart. Then that's
Mm.
putting it into context. So we hearing all these therapists and these psychologists and these specialists on the internet, all these buzzwords being thrown out there. Dysregulated nervous system. Okay, well, what is a dysregulated nervous system? What can we do about it? The body keeps the score. Okay, cool.
Mhm.
We recognize that at a biological, logical level, but how can we use these concepts and put them into context and put them into real life creation of how we transform our lives? That's
Mhm.
the work that I want to see and the change that I want to see
Yeah.
happen.
Yes. Yeah. It's such an important piece of, right, application. What do
Yep.
these things mean, right? What do we do with it? What's
Mhm.
the tangible part of the work, right? And something that I am so excited to do with couples of like, okay, well, how does this show up then in behaviors? And even before behaviors is in starting to create that awareness of those thoughts and beliefs that are enabling the behaviors, and just in the openness to educate yourself about those things, because you're right, at first glance, like if you never heard your families talk about feelings, the idea of looking at an emotion chart sounds stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
Right, like, oh, there's yeah, there is a whole nother language. There are more words than just sad, angry, shame, fear, right? And
Mhm.
so increasing that emotional IQ, that vocabulary around like how do you describe what you're feeling? And it's something that I ask often in session as we're processing things of like, what are you feeling right now? To start creating that connection of like, oh yeah, like talking about this does make me feel something. That's like I feel like a whole nother level of the brain and like eye-opening experience to start even um, giving giving it a bandwidth, to feelings. Because have seen this trend of, right, like we're operating as robots. We're disconnected. We're not really present. We're on such a fast track to go from A to B that we're operating at a very superficial level with like where we're talking about of like central nervous system of like getting to know yourself, like what your body and what you're going through, right? This awareness that what you're seeing is having a deeper impact to you. Like that requires us to like submerge and to start really like honoring ourselves and our bodies in a way that maybe, right, you've never known how to, you've never seen anybody do it. There's never been any real conversations of feelings or how things affect us on that level and like the narratives that it starts forming to us. And although it might sound kind of counterintuitive, well, like I'm sure we've all heard that saying of slowing down to speed up.
Mhm.
That as fast paced as our lives maybe have to be to a certain extent because of just the system that we live in, there's pieces that we do have a say on slowing things down. And so I think a great way to start, and we talked about it and you mentioned it, is like that transition from work to home. That I work with a lot of men individually, high powered execs, like that their life is so full that now they're getting on that place of burnout of, I don't even know which direction's up. I feel like I'm failing now at everything. And that's where, in realizing, like, I have to create windows of time of stillness where I'm not having to consume or do something so that I could check in with myself of like, how the hell am I doing? What do I need right now? And just honoring yourself by doing that or creating a routine around it. So if it's going to the beach, going to the gym, just sitting in your car, listening to classical music, something where your brain is not having to put in a lot of work, that you're honoring the ability to just be, I think is so powerful and an easier, simpler thing, if you will, that can be accessed, would need conversation if you have a spouse and kids at home that are expecting you, like starting to talk about, hey, I need to start taking better care of myself. And so I'm going to need this time so that there is an acknowledgement of that priority that needs to be taken place. And um, then that starts to manage expectations.
Mm.
So it doesn't set up each other for more conflict.
Yeah, I'd love to close at that.
Yeah.
We're at like almost 2 hours here, so
Oh my gosh.
no, you're good. We could keep going, and I'd love your perspective and your viewpoints, and you frame everything very very well, Dr. Kristy, and I really appreciate your
Thank you.
kindness and your time. So I'd love to have you on as a reoccurring guest. We can continue. We can
I
keep
love that.
talking forever, and
Yeah.
I think it's really important to have more of these healthcare professionals that are in this field with, especially for you who are a lived experience, lived example of having a husband at home, and it helps us to relate. It helps us to take things that are happening in real time,
Yeah.
and I'm sure being a mother and you have your own practice and having a husband who's,
Yeah.
working at a busy assignment. So thank you so much once again. I'm definitely going to put down everything in your descriptions or in the description of this podcast episode. But if you like to have say anything, how people can reach you and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for having me, John. It would be an honor to come back and to continue the conversation. So the best way to reach me would be through Instagram, a message at the Ignited Community. And, for people who are outside of California, I do work with them as a coach. But with my therapy background, we're able to have different kinds of conversations and explore different things, which I feel leads to a deeper transformation. And so, yeah, that would be the best way to get a hold of me.
Amazing. Well, thank you everyone for listening. I love you guys. Take care.